There are people who walk through life like shadows, present, breathing, thinking, feeling, yet moving as if the world never quite notices them. They sit in crowded rooms, speak in soft voices, and drift through conversations like smoke. They aren't ghosts, and they aren't broken. They are simply invisible, not in a literal sense, but in the quiet, psychological way that makes their existence feel blurred at the edges. To understand the psychology of people who feel invisible, you must step into their world, a world where the heart beats loudly inside the chest, yet every word seems muted before it ever reaches the air. For many, this feeling begins in childhood, born from the homes where emotions were left unspoken. Some grew up with loving parents who were simply too busy, too tired, too overwhelmed to notice the small tremors of a child's inner world. Others grew up in louder houses, where silence was safer than honesty, and where blending into the background felt like the only way to survive. Invisible people learn early that attention can be unpredictable, sometimes warm, sometimes painful, sometimes absent altogether. So they retreat, little by little, until retreat becomes a habit, and the habit becomes an identity. They learn to sit quietly at dinner tables. They learn to listen more than they speak. They learn to be polite, agreeable, easy to overlook. And as years pass, this way of being settles into the bones, forming a personality that is soft enough not to disturb anyone, and distant enough that no one reaches in. But the truth is that invisible people are often the ones with the richest inner worlds. Their minds are like vast libraries, rooms filled with quiet thoughts, vivid feelings, and stories they never tell. They think deeply. They observe everything. They understand more than anyone realizes. And because they are rarely asked to speak, their thoughts grow like vines, winding and branching into places most people never explore. There is a particular kind of sensitivity in those who feel invisible. They notice small changes in someone's tone, tiny shifts in the room, the way someone's eyes move when they're hiding sadness or frustration. It is the sensitivity of someone who has always watched from the edges, who learned to read emotions without ever demanding space for their own. This sensitivity is both a blessing and a burden. It helps them empathize, connect quietly, and offer comfort without being asked. But it also makes rejection heavier, silence louder, and loneliness deeper. Many invisible people do not intend to hide, they simply assume no one is looking for them. They fear being a burden, so they keep their stories small. They fear embarrassment, so they hold their dreams tightly inside. They fear disappointment, both giving it and receiving it, so they walk softly, trying not to disturb the delicate balance of their relationships. Invisibility can also grow from past wounds. Someone whose ideas were mocked, whose feelings were dismissed, or whose presence was overshadowed may begin to believe, deep down, that they do not matter. They may start expecting disappointment before it happens. They may learn that speaking up leads to conflict, or that vulnerability leads to pain, and so they choose silence because silence feels safer. Yet even silence carries its own ache. For invisible people often crave connection more deeply than anyone else. They long for someone to ask, "What's really on your mind?" They long to be chosen, not accidentally, not out of convenience, but intentionally. They long for someone to see through the quiet exterior and notice the extraordinary depth beneath. But their desire for connection collides with their fear of exposure. And so the struggle begins, wanting to be known, yet terrified of being seen, wanting to speak, yet afraid the words will crumble, wanting to step forward, yet convinced the spotlight will burn instead of warm. Sometimes invisibility is subtle. It shows up in the way someone always steps aside to let others pass, or apologizes too often for things that aren't their fault. It appears in cautious friendships, where they listen intently but rarely share. It appears in workplaces, where their ideas are good but their voice is soft. They are the people who answer texts quickly but hesitate to send the first message. The people who love deeply but quietly. The people who stay late to help, but leave without waiting for thanks. In relationships, invisible people often become emotional caretakers. They support, they soothe, they stabilize. But when it comes to their own needs, they struggle to speak. Not because they don't have needs, but because they have trained themselves not to inconvenience anyone. Partners may mistake this for indifference, when in reality it is fear, the fear that asking for too much will make them unlovable. Yet what invisible people must understand is that invisibility is not a permanent identity. It is a psychological habit, shaped by years of quietness, reinforced by social expectations, and magnified by fear. But habits can be changed. Slowly. Gently. Compassionately. The journey out of invisibility begins not with shouting, but with noticing. Noticing when you swallow your words. Noticing when you shrink yourself to keep the peace. Noticing when you downplay your feelings because someone else's seem more important. And most of all, noticing the quiet belief inside you that says, my presence doesn't matter. For that belief is the root of the invisibility, the small sentence that has lived at the back of your mind for years. You dismantle invisibility by challenging that belief, one tiny moment at a time. By allowing yourself to take up a little more space. By speaking even when your voice shakes. By letting your feelings be real, even when you fear they are inconvenient. By sharing something small, then something bigger, then something true. And with each step, the world begins to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but gradually, like sunrise spreading across a quiet horizon. People begin to notice. Conversations deepen. Connections become reciprocal. The edges of life sharpen, and the color returns. For invisible people were never truly unseen. They simply learn to dim their own light. And when they finally allow themselves to shine, even softly, the world doesn't look away. It leans closer. It listens. It welcomes them back. Because invisibility is not a flaw. It is a story, one written in silence, shaped by past wounds, and carried by gentle souls. But stories can change. And the most powerful transformation begins when a once invisible person finally whispers to themselves, I deserve to be here. I deserve to be seen. And little by little, they step into the light, not as someone loud or forceful, but as someone whole. Someone worthy. Someone visible at last.